Hello, I'm Howard Blumenthal, and this is episode number 45 of Reinventing School. Except for the fact that what we're going to talk about today doesn't necessarily happen in school, because students, everybody really, learns from things that happen all around them, all over the world. And that's particularly relevant here because we're talking about foreign languages. And with great thanks to the ACTFL, who helped us to coordinate all this, we're going to be talking about foreign languages. That's the FL in that phrase. And we're going to look at this from a somewhat different point of view, because language acquisition, for example, happens through your whole life. If you were to take just about anybody and drop them into a place where they didn't speak the language, most likely they would pick up words, and within a fairly short time, they'd be able to communicate with other people, make friends, and all of that. I don't know if you were to compare that with mathematics, for example. It's like, well, you don't know anything about mathematics, so we're going to drop you into this society. My guess is you'd probably figure out how to count and do all kinds of cool stuff. I'm not sure whether you do quadratic equations, but I'm not sure anybody needs to. So with that, let me begin. We have a combination of students and professionals here. And Jessica, I'm going to start with you because I guess we offer congratulations because you are now becoming, or have become, the president of the ACTFL. I've used that phrase now once in this episode, a couple of times in this episode, and also in the previous episode 43, where we talked about classroom learning. So, like, what's that? What is the ACTFL, and what do you do? And as president, like, what does that mean?
Well, thank you.
So tell me the whole story of your life.
Sure. Well, I am the current president of Actful, ACTFL. We say Actful. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. I'm also the supervisor of world languages for New Haven Public Schools in Connecticut, where we have 6 languages and about 85 teachers here in New Haven. As president of Actful, I'm privileged with spending this year working with the board and working with the staff that we have in Washington to promote excellence in world language instruction and research and development across the United States and across the world. We have about 13,000 members. In fact, to your point that language learning happens anywhere, we've recently changed our name to not be ACTFL in the terms of foreign language anymore. But last year, the name was officially changed to be Actful, just as it is, and to refer to world languages, because we really do believe that, and we know here in New Haven that languages are happening right outside our doors. We have 81 languages spoken here in New Haven, for example, and we want students and everyone to understand that languages are out in our communities and in the world, and that's where we can learn them, and there's nothing foreign about it. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, thanks for being here. So, Sophia, we met a few days ago talking about all sorts of different stuff, which was great. World languages. Can you give me, like, because there's a lot of languages in the world, and Jessica just talked about 6 of them, which leaves, like 1 million.
Yeah, there's a lot. And our public school district, we currently only have French and Spanish, but every student is involved in some sort of world language education. And we think it's a really great tool on how to communicate on the global scale, which is, I think, the whole part of world language, is that the global scale also means your local community. And it includes everybody. And that communication and collaboration opens a lot of doors.
So here's the part that confuses me. I go around the world and I interview kids, and I'm like, oh, good. I get to play around with my high school, college Spanish a little bit because I'm in Chile. And of course, all they want to do is speak to me in English. So at some point we have to come together. So I'm trying hard to learn Spanish while that person is trying hard to, so it sounds like, it's sort of a digital Tower of Babel or something, right? So how does this work? Like, is there a dominant language? Should there be a dominant language? Is it good to have lots of different languages? Manuela, explain who you are and what you really do and all that, and give us a sense of that answer.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Manuela Wagner. I'm a professor at the University of Connecticut in the Department of Literatures, Cultures, and Languages. So you're saying you're learning a language, somebody else might learn English. What language do you communicate in? And that's actually exactly what we do in language education, right? Language education is not about teaching our students a code with which they then communicate and translate something. We actually are teaching intercultural competence or intercultural citizenship. We are teaching the competencies for our students to solve problems together. And that you can do in any language. And it's important, of course, it's important to also understand the language and be a mediator. So an important difference that I would like to point out here is that sometimes we feel if we are intercultural citizens, global citizens, we need to be perfect in the language, or we need to have lived in another culture for an extended amount of time. But what we do in language education, we teach the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that our students need to mediate in exactly those kinds of situations that you described, Howard. So that's what we teach. We teach our students to mediate and to be intercultural speakers. And then, of course, those language skills are important, but they can adjust and they can use those skills in any situation.
So I've got this book, Babel. You guys have probably seen it, yes? And it takes apart, puts together about 20 different languages. And when I have conversations about what people want to learn, and I guess we're looking at this from the United States perspective, but I've been in enough places in the world, very few people talk about learning Vietnamese, Tamil, Turkish, Javanese, Persian, a little bit of Punjabi. I'd like to learn Japanese, but I'd like to learn a bit of Swahili. And those are only the sort of numbers 20 through 10. The others just worth, sort of bare mentioning. French at 250 million. Malay, I don't know anybody who speaks Malay. Russian, Portuguese, Bengali, Arabic, Hindu, Urdu, Spanish, Mandarin, and then English. But English has 1.5 billion according to this book. So, we can argue about whether that's a correct figure or not. But if you take English and Mandarin together, that covers a lot of the world. If you take those top 20 languages, you have about half the world, I guess, that can speak those languages, which leaves the other half. So how does that work? Because you sort of never hear about, a school that's teaching this or this or this, and it's just too many. So is that something that the rest of the world is for, and you just don't try to do it at school because you can't get to enough, or there aren't teachers? Like, why don't we teach every language in the world at school? It's a silly question, but it's probably worth starting there and then expanding outwards. So Margaret, you want to give that a shot?
Sure. Hey, everyone. It's so great to be here with all of you with this wonderful community. Margaret Peterson. I'm the executive director of the California World Language Project in the Graduate School of Education at Stanford University. And I love that you mentioned Japanese, Howard. That's the language that Jessica and I share from way back when, decades ago, right, Jessica? So yes, it's very important for the languages of the community to come about. And I've worked for many years in San Francisco Unified School District as the administrator for multilingual pathway programs. And the languages that are taught need to come from the community. So if there's a population of students who and a group of parents who say want their children to learn their heritage language, the language that the second, third generation that they came from, those are the languages that will begin to grow in the community. And indigenous languages are so very important. We have a fabulous Hmong program in Central California in Fresno, and it's one of the 3 areas where the Hmong populations are thriving. And that sense of being able to connect with your heritage language or your heritage culture is an important part of global citizenship, but also the ability to thrive, and so in your social emotional well-being is actually nurtured by being able to speak and communicate in your home language.
That's all very positive, but there's a flip to that, which is if I'm learning this set of languages, whether I'm learning them at home or elsewhere, I'm excluded often, if I'm indigenous, if I mean, my grandparents spoke Yiddish, I didn't see Yiddish in the book, so I'm excluded, and any number of others. So with the best of intentions, we're not in a great place if the idea is to be able to communicate with one another, but I'm not sure I'm thinking about this right. So Rob, can you kind of frame this for us a bit?
Sure. So I guess, first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Bellani. I'm one of the instructors of Arabic language at Yale University. I've been teaching there for over 10 years. I'm a member of Actful, and I'm happy to say that this spring we are running together a series about teaching with social justice. So combining what you asked and the comments together, perhaps it's worth noting that the most important thing when it comes to a learner is their motivation. And we have seen research after research shows us that it is most likely the most important element, is the reason behind them learning a language. And that reason can take them far and deep into not just the language, but learning everything about the culture and the community and the part of the world where that language exists. And that motivation can vary. It can be about connecting with my heritage or trying to get to know more about my identity. It can be for career developing reasons. It can be because I want to travel and discover that part of the world. It can be for religious purposes. Whatever the motivation may be, that will probably be the most important and the key element that, starts a learner on a journey, and more importantly, keep them on that journey.
Okay, but if I'm not motivated, and I'm going to assume that family, economics, travel, media would lead me towards being motivated. But if I'm not especially motivated, what happens to the 500 languages that are in the Democratic Republic of Congo? Not much motivation, except I'd really like, you have a little bit of family and community, but the motivation, if I want to earn a living, is to speak French or to speak English. So in the United States, how motivated are we to resurrect the 500 languages, 400 languages of the native people? It doesn't seem to me we're getting much attention there, but I understand the motivation, and we've got to move forward and be modern and all that. I don't know what to do about that. Leah, how about you? Can't hear a word you're saying.
Go ahead, Manuel, I'm letting you go because I could see her hand going up first. Okay. Well, first, my name is Gardner Kennedy, and I'm wearing two hats. One is the Senior Education Advisor for Actful, and the other hat is that I have been a teacher, an administrator, curriculum writer for the last 28 years, and I'm thrilled to be here with two of my young scholars from Stonington Public Schools. So another aspect of the work that Jess has done as well as some of the others on this call, is to work with JNCL Nicholas. That is our national advocacy body that works with the legislature for funding, for grants, and they have done an enormous amount of work in helping to fund projects and advocate for resurrecting Native and Indigenous languages around our country. So there are lots of groups working to preserve languages. And as we are going through COVID, that was actually a real challenge that many of the Indigenous groups faced as they were losing people, elders in their tribe. So I do think that there's a lot of work happening on that front. To go to the other part of your question that Sarab was just touching upon with motivation, I teach French and Spanish from level 1 through level 5. And not everybody walking through that classroom door is as motivated as the two young women who are coming with me today. And I see it as my job and the job of my colleagues to somehow hook them and to build curiosity about this bigger world through the classroom experiences. So every experience needs to be thought of through the lens of how are we going to hook these students? How are we going to get them to see that language is a tool that they will continue to build so they can collaborate with others and they can solve real world problems. So I know Taylor has been extremely motivated through the past year. We were working with Jose Andres' foundation, so I'll let her share that. But that was really impactful, and we brought in people that I would consider more reluctant learners because they thought that they were using their language for something that was extremely meaningful and purposeful.
Taylor, tell us about it. And you too, tell us about you.
All right, hi. So my name is Taylor Donovan. I'm a senior at Stonington High School. I'm also president of the Spanish Honor Society. I was elected last year. I think for me, my motivation behind learning the Spanish language has been really innate almost because I'm half Puerto Rican. My family on my mom's side is from Puerto Rico. And so I've grown up in this really small town and it's always been kind of sheltered, and I never got to learn the language until I entered 6th grade, and I was really eager to learn the language. And so ever since, I think I've just been really committed to like spreading more about my culture to everyone in my school. And so last year, we, during quarantine, we decided to organize all our different groups in our school to organize over $2,000 donation, I think, to Jose Andres World Central Kitchen, excuse me. And we also edited a joint video where everybody was reciting the lyrics to a song together. And that was really important to me. It just was a great way to connect our community. And I also think that speaking on the motivation, I know for me, it's always been something really natural, but I think that in our culture, it's not normal to learn more than one language. It's normal to learn English or to know your native language. And I think that if we start when kids are really young, teaching them other languages other than just English or just Spanish, then I think that it can be something as natural as learning your times tables, as learning like how to properly structure your sentences. I just think it's something really important.
Now, thank you. The thing that impresses me here is most of what we're talking about here is related to school and learning languages in school. But I thought this episode was going to be about learning languages outside school or in sort of your full life. So Taylor, you didn't start learning Spanish, you said, until you were in 6th grade, but wasn't there a parent from like family from Puerto Rico? Did they not speak Spanish at all? Like, how did that work?
Right. So it had always been kind of around me, but it was something that honestly, as a child, it was difficult to pick up because I was growing up around all these kids who spoke English, all these kids that didn't really understand what it was like to have a parent that spoke another language. My mom's bilingual. She was born in Puerto Rico. My grandparents always kind of made a point to speak to me in English. Okay. And so I think that's honestly something that should be talked about. It should be talked about that my experience wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to learn language as a child because it wasn't what was normal. And I think that should definitely be talked about because if I learned it from when I was a child, I always heard it. I think that's why it's been easier to pick up for me, is that I had always heard it growing up, but I'd never really taken an interest in that. And I think that's what I've been compensating for here in high school.
My family, my cousins and all that always heard it too, Yiddish in our case, but it didn't occur to any of us that we actually should learn it. Like it just wasn't like the parents and grandparents didn't teach it, but they'd speak. But if there was something they did not want us to know, absolutely they were speaking in Yiddish. Jessica.
I just wanted to highlight that I think Kiana, one of our wonderful students from New Haven Public Schools, might be able to speak to what it's like to grow up with a second language and then add a third language, which is a very interesting perspective. And I think Leif could also speak to that as well.
Great. So Kiana, what was the first language, or did you learn two at once? Like how did you acquire that, and where did you learn all the stuff?
Yeah, it's a strange, not a very strange story, but it's quite interesting. So both of my parents are from Honduras and they pretty much predominantly speak Spanish. So I grew up in a household with complete Spanish. So before I entered the school system, I was at my aunt's daycare and they are Puerto Rican. So completely Spanish. So my first language that I acquired was actually Spanish. And then once I
Oh,
entered,
wait, but let me stop you for a sec.
yeah.
Spanish in Honduras, Spanish in Puerto Rico.
Mhm.
Similar, different, not so easy to discern, accents?
Accents, not so much, but definitely slang. I think that's definitely an advantage of being a native speaker, is that I think the difference between learning a language when you are older and acquiring it naturally through a conversation is that you learn more of the colloquial slang and such. So I would say that's a little different, but I've never had any great mishaps with that. But yeah, so Spanish was my first language. And then when I began school, it was obviously a lot more English. And so English is now my more dominant language. However, I am still a Spanish native speaker. And I think that is attributed to not only my family, but also the very diverse New Haven public school system. I've always been surrounded in Fairhaven and those communities that predominantly spoke Spanish and forced me to acquire the language and understand it deeper. And then allowed me to see the importance in it, because going back to, I think, something that was mentioned earlier when we were chatting about the idea of someone wanting to learn Spanish and then someone else wanting to learn English and trying to bridge that gap. That is exactly the situation with my mom. She is trying to learn more English and I'm always trying to learn more Spanish. So it's that sort of understanding how important it is to acquire more than one language. And that has further inspired me to begin learning more Mandarin, starting from high school and continuing throughout college.
Talk to me about the dynamic of you and your mom. Do you laugh about it because you're using the wrong word, or she is? Do you sit down at the kitchen table and go, all right, let's just do verbs. Let's do vocabulary. Let's talk about animals. Like, how do you actually interact with somebody in the household and you both are kind of trying to achieve something, but you also need to communicate because she has to yell at you or you have to yell at her or whatever?
Yeah, it's very informal. I don't think we've ever talked about verbs or anything specific, but the way we usually discuss is it's an everyday conversation. So something we've been able to adapt to quarantine is having breakfast together, which is something I wasn't able to do before because I have to get up so early for school and she has to go to work. But now that we have a little more time in the mornings, we love to just chat. And through those conversations, I've been able to learn more about Honduras and have those conversations about culture while also acquiring the language, because oftentimes it's hard to produce a sentence, eloquent sentence in Spanish when I just don't have the words. So her being semi-knowing English and then also her being fluent in Spanish helps me acquire that. And we'll often exchange that. So sometimes I'll speak to her completely in English and we'll work out the kinks of using pronouns or verbs and such. So I would say it really does mix, but it's more about just having conversation rather than having a language lesson.
So Leif, we haven't gotten to you yet. So we have a bunch of people who want to talk. So what languages do you speak? How did you learn them? Do you want to learn more? Do you actually use multiple languages in real life, or is it just kind of just cool academic records?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I will really love to answer that. I'm Leif Dykstra. I am a senior at the Sound School here in New Haven, Connecticut. And I'm also the chair of tutoring for my school's chapter of the National Spanish Honor Society. And, you know, for most of my life, I didn't know any other language other than English. But the interesting thing is that my family always involved other languages. You know, from the time that I was like 2, we had little phrases. We had things that were borrowed from other languages. So like my grandparents on my dad's side, they were full Frisian, which is a part of the Netherlands now. And so we would involve little things there, like ik hou van dag. That means like it's translated to I love you or something. So if we're hugging before going to the airport, you know, we would say that instead, or you know, certain phrases in Spanish. And so involving those little bits of other languages, even without knowing the whole language, kind of like where you were talking about, you know, hearing it but not being able to speak it, it definitely starts you out on a path to being able to speak other languages in the future. And now I speak Spanish fairly fluently. I've got the seal of biliteracy in that, and I'm learning German too at Yale. And I'm learning a little bit more of Frisian because my dad and I are actually looking into becoming Dutch citizens, hopefully. So, I would like to learn many other languages as well, though.
And if you want to learn other languages, are you going to go to an organized language instruction source, or are you just going to kind of plop in the middle of pick a place and go, I'm just going to hang out here for a year and I'll learn it? Like, how confident are you in we don't really need the classroom part of it, or Duolingo or whatever you choose? And how does it work? How does it work in your head?
Well, I really love the idea of just like putting yourself in the middle of a culture and a language and learning that way. And my dad did that in Germany and France and places. So I'm a huge fan of that. And I like, because then you get the sense of the culture as well. As you learn the language, you understand the nuances of it, like idioms and stuff like that. It only comes when you actually can speak with people who speak the language fluently. And in a classroom, sadly, often there's not enough time to actually practice full immersion. So it gets broken up and then you don't get the full experience. Whereas if you can put yourself into a culture and a language fully, then you get like the maximum out of it.
So that's a huge privilege to be able to just suddenly say, I'm going to live in France, I'm going to live in Japan for a year or whatever it is. And not everybody can do that. I would have liked to. At 8 years old, if you'd asked me what I wanted to do, I would have said I would like to go to Japan and I would like my family to live there, and I'd like to learn how to speak Japanese and be fully immersed in the culture, or whatever however an 8-year-old would say that. But it never happened. And even going now as an adult several times to Japan and staying for a few weeks, I'm a tourist. So I pick up a word here, I can pick out something on a menu, but that's not really, first of all, it doesn't stay. As soon as I get on the plane, all those words stayed in Japan and I'll never see them again. So how do you do this if you're sort of an average person? Am I going to go to Japan? I think Los Angeles has a Japantown, and just hang out there. So Jessica, let's focus on that just quick.
Well, it's sort of an irresistible question to me because in a sense, that's what I did. I studied French and Spanish in high school and college, and then decided to go to Japan my junior year in college. So I had no Japanese when I arrived in Japan, except that I did have the advantage of entering a university course there. And looking back on it and looking at the other experiences I've had in being in countries for extended period of time, I do believe that you gain a lot when you are immersed in the culture, like Leif said. That's that's the best possible situation, because everything surrounding you at all times is that language and culture, and you gain so much from that. But you also do really gain from having a teacher walking you through the pieces of that language. I had plenty of friends who were just living in Japan, and they sort of reached a certain point of ability and it sort of stayed there. And I do believe that it's sort of those two things together, the immersion as well as the somewhat step-by-step, and definitely the scaffolding, we call it. So the sort of supportive environment of what a teacher can give really does make a difference in how quickly and how sort of comprehensively you can learn a language.
So where does watching a movie, watching television, watching telenovelas, all of that, right? I mean, you run into somebody every once in a while, it's like, well, how did you learn English? I watch telenovelas. It's like, there's no way that watching a soap opera every day, I'm going to learn another language. So am I just missing something here? And can somebody speak specifically to what's going on in my brain when this is happening? And I'd love you to get into some details. So I don't know which of the professionals can address cognitive.
I would love to hear Leah talk about input.
Please.
I'll jump in here because I think that probably all 4 of the students on this call, I'm taking a risk saying this without asking, earned the seal of biliteracy. Am I correct in saying that?
Oh, right. What is that? Let's just stop there for a sec.
Okay. So when I turn over one of the students, do you want to say what the seal of biliteracy is?
Yeah. So Sophia, tell us what's this all about?
So the seal of biliteracy, actually our school district was the pilot district in the state of Connecticut for the seal of biliteracy, headed by Miss Kennedy. And it's a somewhat standardized test that looks at 4 areas: reading, writing, speaking, and
I'm
listening.
hoping
Thank
it's
you.
jokes. The fourth one's jokes, right? Being able
No,
to tell a
not
joke and laugh. No?
listening, and you take each of the sections, and if you score intermediate 4 or higher on each section, then you're
Okay.
given the seal of biliteracy, and it goes on your permanent transcript.
Got it. Okay, good. So, Leah, continue. I'm sorry, I stopped.
And so we have had lots of conversations with our congressmen and women, recognizing them for getting this, because what they have to do is come in. We're setting up all these performances within the classroom. We want to make it as authentic as possible, give them tons of rich, authentic input that they'll see in the real world, because our goal is to craft performances that are going to point towards an indication of proficiency. So the students score themselves all the time. They'll listen to a recording of themselves, judge a writing and say, I think this is an intermediate mid, I think this is an intermediate high because, and here's my goal to move to the next level. So we give them those opportunities across all of those modes, the interpersonal, the listening, the speaking, and writing. So, and then they get a chance to be able to solve these problems using the language skills. And I think that that is a big part of allowing them to make gains across all modes of communication.
So that's effective use of classroom instruction. Yes?
Yeah.
I think I'm asking a different question.
Okay.
I think the question I'm asking is, when I'm learning a language, and I guess if I'm trying to balance several languages, what is the process of what's happened? What is the physiology? What is the neurology that's happening in the brain that allows me to or not to do it? And do different people have a different biochemical structure, electrical structure in the brain that make, like, what, can somebody explain the science of this, or is there no science of this? So Manuela, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I can say, I'm not a neuroscientist. I worked in at the Max Planck Institute for Brain Research actually for 2 years, but doing different work on the visual system. I did communicative language, communicative studies, but not with the brain, related to the brain. But in general, we know that, of course, the brain changes when we learn a language, right? We reshape the brain. How that works, everything that has to do with the brain and with something as complicated as learning and learning a language, we cannot say exactly how it happens, right? We know what areas light up. We know that the brain is much more plastic, so the neuroplasticity is much higher than we thought many years ago, right? Now, when somebody has a stroke and loses certain function, we know even later in life, those can be regained and other areas can take up the functions. So there's a lot that we're learning. One aspect, Howard, if I may, that I want to point out, I see a little bit in this conversation a dichotomy between language learning in the classroom and language learning outside of the classroom. And hopefully, I don't think we're doing it that way anymore. Very much what we do in the classroom relates to our students outside of the classroom as well. So in other words, there are some advantages that our students have by learning a language in the classroom, the scaffolding, right? And I personally believe very much in a learning theory that is called situated cognition, so that we don't learn something by just, like you said, watching a telenovela and all of a sudden I have all the vocabulary saved in my. I need somebody who is mentoring me in some way, who is helping me, who does something just a little bit ahead of my ability, so that I can really grasp and I can communicate at my level, right? Whether that happens in the classroom or outside of the classroom, it has to happen like that in some way, shape, or form. I'm not just, when I'm immersed, I'm not just learning it without any work on my part or without any help from somebody else. So that dichotomy, I'd like to break up a little bit. And I'd also like to say a lot of what we do inside of the classroom is helping our students making those connections, watching those movies, interacting with somebody, in the community who speaks the language or somebody who learns the language, and do something with it. So we are giving them those immersive opportunities as well. And I'm going to stop here.
Well, you've led down a very interesting direction. How much of it do I remember, and what do I need to do in order to continue to remember, not necessarily for 6 months, but for a year or 5 years or 20 years?
Frequency,
So,
frequency, 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 frequency.
okay, it's kind of like real estate then. So Rob.
Sure. And again, I want to say I'm not necessarily a specialist in what happens in the brain when we learn a language, but we do know, here's a sentence that language instructors are well too familiar with. We don't conjugate, we communicate. And that's what's happening in our brains when we are trying to learn the language and then when we're trying to use the language, whether we're learning it at home because we're living in a multi-language home, or that we're learning it in the classroom. The ultimate motivation, which is again what is making us learn, is that we want to communicate. As successful educators, that's what we need to do. We need to offer the learners authentic, genuine opportunities to communicate, and then watch them take off, watch them learn it and gain it, master it, and use it. And this way, I think we're kind of offering them the world in a language. Because when they're going to make those communications, whether they're going to communicate with like a student with them, a colleague in the classroom, or whether they're communicating at home over the dinner table, like the example we just heard, or whether they're communicating with a telecollaborative partner that they're having over the internet, somewhere else in the world, give them an authentic source for communication, and that's what's going to lead the way. And all we're doing is really supporting that and then making sure that we're leading it in the right direction for it to happen, to be sustained, and to continue.
So in my research, I'm finding that this generation, as in people born since the year 2000, are more familiar with more places and more cultures in the world than any generation of human beings before. And we're getting that in part because of travel, in part because of media, Korean boy bands, the Olympics, Harry Potter. I mean, there's just so many different variations on the theme. So it seems to me that many children and teenagers know a lot about 10 other countries, 15 other countries. But if I were to challenge us, and I'm not sure if we have time, we will, to actually try to name every country in the world or even half of them, how many of us could do it? Right. I mean, and somebody said something about Yale and Brown and so I've actually done this test with many different people in different schools, high income, low income, very world oriented, not so world oriented. Typically what'll happen is you'll get about 20 countries, 2 kids standing at the blackboard, kids shouting at them in the classroom, 20, 25, and then they slow down, and then I prompt them about some form of Chinese food or something, and then somebody will shout out China. And we get to 25. When I ask adults, if they're not especially worldly, they'll get into the 30s. If they're somewhat worldly, even college professors and the like, they'll get into the 40s, maybe the 50s. So I developed and produced the leading geography show in the world, right? With Carmen Sandiego. And I would struggle to get past about 120, 130. A very well-educated BBC former BBC journalist got up to about 180 of arguably 195. We don't know much about other countries, even though we can name them, or at least name some of them. When you ask, all right, so tell me about that place, I get a sentence. And yet it seems to me that in order to be able to be effective foreign language, to create effective language instruction across the world, you at least have to know something about the places you're talking about. So I guess this very long lead into this question, are you finding that in social studies? Are you finding that in science? Are you finding that in math or other subjects, art, music, that there's the kind of energy in learning about other places, other cultures, that you guys seem to take for granted and do all the time? Are you feeling as though you have some re-education to do, or are you feeling like, no, that's the culture, everybody's picking it up anyway? So Taylor, I'm going to start with you on that.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about this. So, while you were talking, it kind of reminded me of my freshman year Spanish class. We did this activity where we had to memorize all of the countries in South America and Central America, and we had to memorize 3 facts about each of them. Which, looking back at that, that seems insane. And I remember doing that. I don't remember a single thing of what I learned from that. And so I think this was prevalent in a lot of my other classes too, where in modern world history, we would label maps of the Middle East, we'd label maps of Asia. Going back to 5th grade, we label maps of the United States. I don't think I can do that anymore. And I think that's because I always did it because it was a quiz grade, because it was something that had to happen. And so I don't think that I really retained the passion or the motivation for that. And I think that I wish that I did, because I wish that I knew the 3 facts that I learned about Argentina. Like, I think that would be so useful to know going into the future, interacting with all different types of people. But yet in school, it's always for a grade. It's always for a reason. It's never just for your own intrinsic purposes.
But half your time you're not in school, so you do have a certain amount of time you could devote to it if you wanted to. Margaret, we haven't heard from you in a while. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I want to bring up a global competence, because we really want our students to thrive as empathetic global citizens, right? And global competence is the knowledge, skills, and dispositions to thrive in a rapidly changing, complex global world. And that's, we are in a very unique time in history with the global pandemic, with the racist murders and the horrible incidences that we've seen not only in the United States but worldwide. And now is the time more than ever, with the shelter in place, virtual learning, now with the vaccinations and thinking about going back to teaching in person. This is the opportunity to really, really transform and reinvent the way that we think about school and education. And I think that the core domains of global competence really can get at that. It's really instilling in us as individuals and people in society, investigating the world and how important that is, recognizing diverse perspectives with empathy and compassion, communicating interculturally, and taking action to make the world a better place. And those are the cornerstones of global competence. And that is also tied in really nicely with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So important. It's an urgent call to really end poverty, protect the planet. And I know that the students here are on the forefront of being able to make those things happen.
So Jeffrey Sachs, you know the name, former Columbia University professor, pointed something out that I find really creepy, scary, and really important to remember. And that is, if you don't know the name of the country and you don't know anything about it, you're simply not going to help those people. Right. And we're in a world now where we're highly dependent, whether it's viruses or climate or getting to know people and all that. But if I have to explain what South Sudan is, the likelihood that we're going to have any degree of compassion is so low. And yet, as I think about this, I'm not sure I know what language they speak in South Sudan. What is the common language there? Does anybody know the answer to that? Like, why don't we know that? We care about this a lot, but here's 10 of us and we're really not quite sure. And when I say South Sudan, what do you got for me? I mean, just kind of brainstorm. Tell me anything you know about South Sudan. You can't all be quiet. Come on, give me something.
I can try to let you know the information that I do know.
Okay.
So relatively speaking, it is a new country.
Yeah.
And now there is South Sudan and North Sudan. The population is mostly of Christian religion. There is a little bit of Arabic spoken there. However, it's not the dominant language. There are a multitude of African languages that are also spoken there. And as a relatively young state, they're working through a number of issues from laws to constitution to formations to borders, et cetera, et cetera.
That was terrific. And I pulled up Wikipedia just to see how you were doing. And either
And
you
if
wrote the
you-
article or
yeah.
you're very right. Yeah,
And if you if you allow me to continue,
please.
that's another thing all of our students now do. They have the world at their fingertips. In their phone, in a minute, they can pull up information about this or that or the other. And that adds a challenge to the educator. Do they really need me for the information? No, the information is there for them. The information is there for them in more than one formation. They can read it, they can listen to it, they can hear someone talk about it, they can watch a video. They don't really need me for the information. They need me for the experience. If I'm a good educator, then I'm going to be able to give them an actual experience that will help them shape their knowledge and their skill. And that's what they need us for.
So for me, you opened a few doors in that little mini lesson. One of them is, gee, I don't know enough about this. I probably should find out more. So I'll get myself over to YouTube and I'll read the Wikipedia article. The first language that was mentioned on the Wikipedia page was Juba Arabic, Juba Arabic?
Yeah, it's one of the dialects
Okay.
of Arabic.
So that means Arabic has dialects. I'm not
Correct.
sure I knew Arabic had dialect. I mean, I suspect that just as with any language, but it's named. It
Correct.
broke away from Sudan for a reason. I'm not sure I know the reason. I know that at some point I read the reason, but I don't have it. So you've generated just that bit of curiosity in me. And I know that will lead to learning more about other places. Same thing. I'm going to pick it up on the phone and be annoying at dinner and, make that the subject of conversation. It's like, oh, come on, really? So, and that, we all do that, right? So is that sort of kind of what we're talking about, Manuela?
Thank you. So thank you so much for this conversation. I'm having so much fun and so much is brought up. So there were so many small parts that are important here. And thank you, Sarab, for bringing up this important part of you're bringing the world to the students, and they have a lot of the knowledge, right? The knowledge they can gain. We need to help them with the skills to evaluate the knowledge. And Howard, you mentioned a few times in this conversation, I don't know this and I want to know more. This intellectual humility that we teach with language in language education. You also brought up compassion and empathy, right? And empathy, some point out, and empathy is important, but empathy sometimes shines a spotlight on what we know. But if we can teach compassion, diffuse compassion, and really make students curious about the things they don't know, then they can also have compassion when they learn something and want to learn more about something. So it doesn't need to be everything they know. Knowledge, we cannot teach all the knowledge. We know that. We don't know. And in this group, there might be a lot we know, but we know far from everything, right? But if we teach curiosity, how to evaluate if the information we get is reliable, if we teach intellectual humility, knowing that we don't know everything, that's what we're trying to get at in language education.
So for the students, you guys are pretty smart. Is that a fair statement? You're academically doing well and all that. So tell me about feeling, I want to say feeling stupid because that's the way I would say it, but you may say it a different way. Tell me about feeling somewhat ignorant when you're in a room going, I'm with a group of people. I'm not scanning this. I have so much to learn. You know that feeling, yes? Or am I skewing that in a different way? So Kiana, you're smiling. Give me a sense of what it feels like to sort of be almost empty.
Yeah, so I'm a native Spanish speaker, but when I entered high school, I decided to start learning Chinese, which is a complete 180 from Spanish and what I had known. So it is, for me personally, it was kind of terrifying when you're starting practice and you really know nothing. You don't know how to write a character, you don't know how to pronounce things. And for Chinese, especially, it's not like Spanish where you can guess, oh, presidente means president because it kind of sounds like it. It's completely different. So I think for me,
and you have tones, right?
Yes, you have
Chinese.
tones
So
as
explain
well.
what that tone thing is all about.
So there are 4 tones in Chinese that dictate the specific word. So I'm probably not explaining it to the full extent, but it's really complicated because if you can have the same 2 words like ma, M-A, but depending on the tone, they can mean completely different words. And
let's hear that. For example, I'll put you on the spot. Give us an example.
So there's ma, which is first tone, and then there's ma, and then there's ma, and then there's the 4th tone, ma. So it's completely different tones. And that's the hardest part for Chinese for me, is you can't really just memorize the ways things kind of sound. It has to be very exact. So there are often times where I feel very ignorant speaking Chinese because one of the practices we do is conversation with our, for Chinese for independent study with Lao Shi, and having those conversations. And most of the time, 50% of the conversation, I do not understand. And so it's trying to see, okay, what did I understand from that? And how can I use the resources I have to figure out what that meant and then integrate that into my learning? So I think that is very much the experience part. So I think being ignorant isn't necessarily a bad thing if you're willing to take that curiosity further. So yeah, it always inspires me to learn things, to see that I don't know everything, so I can continue learning, if that makes sense.
There's another distinction as you're talking about Chinese, and I don't know the answer to this. If I look at Spanish and there's a tilde over an N, I have a sense of how to pronounce that N. When I look at a Chinese character, is it telling me how to say that character, or is it a pictorial meaning in some way? Like like written language doesn't always scan, right, with spoken language. And sometimes there's multiple Japanese, hiragana, and all that stuff, right? So come back to, how does that work?
So the way we learn it in high school is you start by writing very basic characters and then assigning each character their pinyin. So that is the actual spelling. And the spelling is very different from English. So you have to learn the different sounds of the language as well as the tones. So it's attributing each character its name, but then as you continue learning, you realize that some characters look the same, but then have different meanings within the context of the sentence. And then it becomes more of a, you're not just learning it word by word, which can be very inefficient. It's more learning dialogues and then practicing those dialogues with your teacher, with other students, and other vocabulary words and groups as well.
Okay, that's complicated. Sarab, I know bits of Hebrew from Hebrew school, and then since 13 years old, I've done my best to avoid anything related to Hebrew school because it was not the wonderful experience that they hoped it would be. And then I look at Arab lettering, and I'm thinking, well, you guys live nearby, so there should be some relationship. And occasionally I'll hear a word and you go, yeah, that's just like the word in it, right? But most of the time it's like, I don't even know that's writing. Like I can't even make the connection. But so is it letters? Is it similar to Chinese? It looks beautiful, but I can't decode it in my dumb brain as written words or written, help me.
So generally speaking, from my understanding, as far as the writing system, there are like 2 main systems. One is an alphabetic system, such as Arabic and such as Hebrew, where when we write the word, we write it like sound by sound. Other languages, such as Chinese, they're not alphabetic system, wherein the symbol that is used to represent a word is not necessarily every sound one at a time, which when you're used to one system, it might make learning the other a little bit difficult. There are languages who are like sister languages as far as like language families are concerned, such as Arabic and Hebrew, which means they share a lot of commonality together. There is, as far as Arabic and Hebrew are concerned, for instance, There are roots, they share roots that are kind of the stem meanings between the two languages, and they have the similar meanings between the two languages.
Okay.
Sometimes they vary a little bit. And that's what, you know, when you hear, you think, oh, I think I recognize it, or I think I hear it. But the writing system is different, and that's because every language, you know, has its own path and history in the way that it develops and in the way that it evolves. But that's the other point too, is if you are familiar with one language, which is also a point that Kiana had mentioned earlier, and you hear a word from another language that you recognize, you make the connections. And all of, I want to say, all of the language educators in the United States, we all work according to the standards of Actful. And the standard of Actful between communication, culture, connection, comparison, and connections, what we're trying to do really, regardless of the languages that we teach, we're trying to get the message across is that we are all more similar than we are different. So even if I don't know the name of that country, or if I don't know much information about it, or if I don't know what they speak, I have realized through the path of studying Chinese or Hebrew that as human beings, we are more similar than we are different. And I can take that knowledge with me when I want to learn that language and go deeper in it, or if I even want to venture into learning a new language.
But I may, through the immersion, focus more on the speaking and hearing, listening, than the written. The written, it may, I mean, we think about these as all one unit, but they aren't necessarily one unit, I guess. Now, two of you, and I think Jessica, you were one, talked about Japanese. Now, Japanese has three different, it has kanji, hiragana, katakana, if I remember correctly. They broke it down differently. Is that something all languages do? And I'm just kind of catching up with that? Or is that a particular, like, explain why you would need, what those are and why you would need that, and just as another variation on these many themes.
Right. Well, no, not all languages do that. Obviously, English just uses letters, and then we have sort of phonetics to sound out words. In Japanese, which is a little bit different from Chinese, we use the Chinese-derived characters of kanji, and then we have the hiragana and katakana, which are used exclusively in Japan, that are phonetic. So we have the kanji that are sort of pictorial and can hold a meaning just by looking at it. So I can look at a character and know that it means tree. And then, interestingly, I can look at a Chinese character and often guess the meaning because of that connection, but I have no idea how to say it when I'm in my teacher in the Chinese classes. I can just sort of know what they're talking about by looking at the board, what the characters are. But in Japanese, you know, you see that character for tree, and then the hiragana could be written as a way to help you know how to pronounce it. Or there are some words in Japanese that are exclusively written in hiragana. And then there's katakana, which is another phonetic alphabet that really is mostly used for cognates, to sort of signal that a word is borrowed from another language. It's used for sounds, like the sounds in a comic book, like whip, bam, boom, or whatever. I'm not good at comic books, but whatever the Japanese would be for that, and things like that. But can I return to one quick thing that has been mentioned a lot, and I just feel like it needs to be said, is that to me, it really doesn't matter whether we are able to offer every single language in the world, or whether we're able to, or whether students have every single experience. What really matters to me, and whether it actually doesn't matter to me either, whether they stick with the same language from elementary, where I think it should start, all the way up. As you've heard, students are adding languages and changing languages, because the gift that we ultimately are giving students, especially if, and perhaps only if, we are using the target language in our classrooms a lot, which is very different from how we all, those of us who are, 30 and over, we'll say, those of us who are 30 and over, when we went to school, we talked about language in our classrooms. We talked in English about our languages, and then we spoke a little language, maybe 50% if we were lucky in the classrooms. But that's not what we're doing now. I mean, we're surrounding students with language in an immersion-like environment in the classrooms, so that when they are outside, so they can feel very comfortable in the authentic environment. And what that does is it gives them the gift of being comfortable in a, quote, foreign situation. So like Kiana said, when she has, when she has those conversations with her Chinese teacher, 50% she doesn't understand. And I would agree. When I watch, I'm very proficient in Japanese, but when I watch the news, I understand 60% of the news, but then I use visuals, I use words I know. You start to be able to pick out what you know based on your context, your visuals, your surroundings. And that's really the work of language learning. And you have that for any situation you go to, any country you go to. When I traveled to Albania with my husband's family, I'm the one that figures out what we should do just by using those intercultural competence skills, which you get through learning any language well, and then can apply to any other language and situation, even situations in English that are foreign to you, like, a fancy business meeting or a scientific conference or whatever it might be. So that ability to stay calm, look for clues, figure out what you should do to behave appropriately and politely. That's really the gift I think we give students when they learn languages.
And I've seen that play out because in sort of the day job, if you will, I've been going around the world interviewing kids in so many different places. And you touched on, they're going to want to demonstrate competence, or at least feel something with the English language speaker in the room. So they're going to try their best. And sometimes we'll have a translator, and sometimes we build bridges and all that. So here's when it didn't work. And it sort of bends my brain a little bit to think about this. So we're in rural Paraguay. We're about an hour and a half away from Asunción. We're in the Campo, and it's primarily indigenous. And we're doing okay because some of the people who are taking me around speak Guarani, but we assume that indigenous meant Guarani. Well, it does for a percentage, but a percentage of people. So here's this girl, she's about 12 years old, and my Spanish is weak, but I want to ask the question. So I ask the question to an associate, local, and he translates from English to Spanish so that he can then explain it to the next person in line who's going to go Spanish to Guarani. And then there's somebody else there who knows how to take it from Guarani to her own indigenous language, which I've forgotten about. And then this girl at the end pretty much is in tears the whole time because we're so bad at this. And we're all well-educated and caring and very experienced in doing this. And we just can't build that bridge. So the contrast to what you're talking about is, yes, use every available tool. Yes, cues. Yes, all of that. Yes, a heart full of love. But there's times when you simply need the other person to be able to tell you something in terms that you understand. High on that list in another country is, where is the bathroom? That's not, you don't have a whole lot of time, right? You just,
well, I would just interject to say, though, that I think any language teacher on this call right now is dying to say to you, did you try drawing a picture?
Yes. Yes.
Because visuals are one of the things that we absolutely rely on from beginners to, to communicate, or a gesture,
Yeah, Sketchpads got me through rural Japan travel about 20 years ago, and it was brilliant. So yes, and apparently either my instincts are good or well schooled. So in here somewhere, there's this wonderful desire to know every language in the world. There's this frustration that I have when I travel to this country or that country. It's like, well, I'm going to be in Paraguay, so I want to learn Guarani, but the week after that, I'm in Sao Paulo. So I don't know how to get everything I want. And of course, I'm being very observant and very caring and trying to pick up words and using visual cues and getting whatever help I can from the people who are with me. But I feel inadequate. And not to a point where I feel like an imposter, but I just sort of feel like I really could do better. And I wish that my training were better. Leif, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a really interesting feeling, because in my current German class that actually it's about to end, it's been about 7 months long. We try to involve a lot of immersion, but the class sadly is only once per week. So I'm sitting there and I'm hearing full-on German for a good hour, and it's very hard to pick up, you know, the actual language. So it'd be kind of like going to Sao Paulo and hearing people talk, and you're like, oh, what am I listening to here? I can't do anything. So my kind of half remedy for that is to at least learn the accent. I find a great amount of value in learning the accent and a few like key phrases, because once you've put yourself into the shoes of the language itself, and you've learned the accent, you've learned a couple of maybe idiomatic phrases, you can use that to get further. You know, I'm not completely fluent in all forms of Spanish, and yet I'm considered bilingual because I can get far enough. And that's partially because I've learned the accent, I've learned idiomatic phrases, and all the other things that go into it. And that's what I'm doing with German too.
Okay, Sophia, how about you?
I think a really important distinction is that language is not about perfection. It's not about perfecting every form of a verb. It's not about perfecting every word in a vocabulary list. It's about, like Leif just said, to earn the seal of biliteracy, it's about being good enough. It's about being good enough to be able to establish that communication, because once you can establish a good enough communication, that's when collaboration can start to happen. And you mentioned feeling inadequate because you couldn't know and pick up every single word. Of course,
Well,
nobody's.
I failed. The girl cried. I failed. I'm the grown up in the room. It wasn't her problem. It was my problem.
And of course, you're going to run into that because if you're traveling the world, none of us are going to know every language. But I think a big part of it also too is just the attempt. It shows respect for the culture,
Yes.
and also that, of course, remembering that it's not about being perfect. It's about trying, and as you learn more, then of course you can immerse yourself more.
And the other person will help you. Others will help you. And it's one of those sort of remarkable things where everybody comes in and gives you a hug, right? I mean, it's sort of, yeah. So Margaret, what are you thinking?
I've seen a couple of hands up, so I wanted to make sure that Sarab and Leah have a chance
Fine.
to speak.
Call on somebody. It's yours.
Well, I'm going to jump in with Margaret here because my students who are here on the call have done a ton of work with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I do think that they were so nervous. They just did research. 95 young scholars did research on 39 different countries. It was actually based on a course that Manuela just ran for people all over the world. We're joining on Saturdays from Singapore, Australia, Europe. And they were teaching us how to build out these units that were going to allow students to get involved in borderless curriculum, borderless lessons. And they went out on their own. I don't know about all these 39 countries, and they researched the biodiversity of each one, the challenges that it faces, wow, and what can be done at the local and global level in order to help remedy the problem. And it was so exciting to see the students really latch onto those sustainable development goals and use the language. And I said, now you've got to get up and speak. And they had to speak in front of 200 people. But they said, but we're not fluent. Like we can't, we're performing and presenting in another language. We're messing up with making mistakes. I'm so happy Sophia was in my French class last year. We used to always talk, it's not about the errors. Are you elaborating? Are you getting that meaning across? And so and that was something that came through in your music podcast, I heard too, Howard, that it's getting the students to move past that fear of making errors. And it's not the grammatical accuracy. It's, can you help resolve climate change? UN SDG number 13. What can you do to make a difference with marine life? SDG 14 at the local level. Here are 10 action steps. And they gave the 10 commands. And it really is the 10 commands for each of the 17 sustainable development goals. Right. So they did their 10 commands and explained why they're important. And yes, there were errors, but the collaboration with people from across the world, they're now, Sophia maybe can jump in and say, they're going to continue this project next year with Happy World Foundation, which is just fabulous, in my opinion.
I just reached out to Happy World this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you for that suggestion. Yeah. Sophia, and then I'm going to ask Manuela, what did you do and why did you do it? But in this whole crazy project, but Sophia, you've been on the ground with this, so tell us about that.
Yeah, so it was definitely, we were building the plane as we were flying it. It was something completely new with a lot of people coming together, but it was a way to not just make schools about giving you awareness, saying, here, this is a problem with the climate that our generation caused, and you should go fix it. It's about instilling that motivation to go do it. And like Ms. Kennedy said, with borderless classrooms, why only have this immersion inside of classroom 110 where French language is taught? Why not let it be part of, we were teaching biodiversity in French. So why not let that science be part of French? We could talk, go into math and talk about rates of change of deforestation. Why have everything be so segregated when it can be so much more efficient doing it at the same time? And that was kind of our whole goal, and also to do a little bit more peer-on-peer collaboration rather than just sitting on Google Meets and listening to lectures like we have been all year. And I think that instillment of peer-on-peer collaboration, as well as why are we segregating every topic so harshly, was allowing for so much more learning to happen at a given time.
It is so clear that this is the way 21st century people learn. And I just want to take school and strangle it, right? It's like, just let this happen. Manuela, borderless, lay this out. This is a wonderfully crazy idea. Where'd this come from? How did it happen? What's happened since?
Thank you so much. So the project itself with all the students, that's what Leah did and her students. So really applause. I was just so happy to hear about this. The course that Leah was mentioning was one I co-taught with my co-authors of a book we published that came out of work that we've been doing for many, many years.
What's the name of the book?
The book is teaching.
Wait 1 second, because Leah, you have to say something so we see it, because she just held the book up. So please say something. One of you, please say something so that the camera will automatically cut to you.
Intercultural citizenship across the curriculum. And this is by Manuela Fabiana Cardetti, as well as Mike Byram from Durham University in the UK.
Thank you.
Yes. Sorry, we don't have an automatic switcher, so. Thank
you very much, Leah. And Michael Byram created a theory a long time ago, actually a model of intercultural communicative competence. What many of us have been mentioning today, what we teach is so much more than just the language. We really teach the skills and the knowledge and the attitudes so that we can become intercultural speakers, that we can mediate, that we can solve problems together. And that intercultural citizenship means that we're helping our students use the language and the intercultural communicative competence and solve a problem, a societal problem in the here and now. With this book, a colleague in mathematics, Fabiana Cardetti at UConn, Mike Byram, who created the theory, and I took it a step further and said, we can do that interdisciplinarily. We can work in schools with other subjects, we can work at universities with other disciplines, and we have done so. And really teach something that our students can use in the here and now, where they use their life skills, everything they have, and their skills from the other classrooms. We break down the classroom walls, and then we go out into the community, break down the school walls, and take it further out into the international community if we want to, but really do something with it in the here and now. And that's where also that communicative need comes from, because I can imagine Sophia and others on the call, when you wanted to say something, you were motivated to use that language, right?
On that note, we've covered a lot of territory today. We ran about 10 minutes over, and my apologies about that. We're going to roll the credits, and then hopefully you guys can hang out for just a couple of minutes. We can talk about what we did. So we will see everybody for the next episode, which will be number 46. Talk to you soon. For on-demand episodes and more, visit our website. Kids on Earth contains hundreds of video interviews with students from around the world. Learning Revolution is a global collaboration network for people who care about learning. Be sure to join us next Thursday for a new episode of Reinventing School. Thanks for watching.